Welcome to CPAC Now America Uncanceled. Yes, we made it to Thursday. I can't believe it.
Awesome.
I'm Mercedes Schlapp.
I'm Matt Schlapp.
That's great. We have really enjoyed being with you all week after week after week as we're bringing the top newsmakers to you. In fact, Matt, Rick Grinnell, who joined us this past week, the interview we had with him, it made news. It was picked up by several media outlets, and I want to share with you a quick soundbite about Rick Grinnell and his analysis of who is running the White House.
All right, the former acting director of national intelligence, Rick Grinnell, says someone else in the White House, Senator, is calling the shots behind the scenes. Let's watch and then I'll get your first reaction.
President Biden is too weak to stop the progressive lefts from taking over the domestic and foreign policy. Kamala Harris does not understand what's going on because she's not an expert on foreign policy. And Susan Rice is really happy that Biden is too weak. Kamala is totally distracted with the 50-50 Senate and has to be up at the Senate. She's running the show. We have a shadow president in Susan Rice, and no one is paying attention.
So Schlapp, it's President Susan Rice. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, and what that really means, which was not part of that clip, is that Barack and Michelle Obama, who are really tight with Susan Rice,
that's right,
are probably really pulling the strings through Susan Rice and the Biden administration. This is the parlor game that everyone in the country, really everybody in the world, is playing, which is who's really making the decision, the Biden administration.
That's right. And, you know, there's another story that just popped as well. So now Dr. Fauci has just said that we don't need to wear a mask outside if you are vaccinated. OK, so get it right, because God only knows he keeps changing his mind every other day.
So this is coming from the CDC, and you had a tweet on this.
I did have a tweet on it. I said someone should tell Biden and Harris. I don't know if you saw last week when Kamala Harris was kissing her husband outside, both wearing a mask. Very awkward moment. But I got to tell you, talk about the muddled message constantly coming out from the Biden administration. We saw President Biden when he went in to see Jimmy Carter, took off the mask, then went outside, put the mask on. Get it right. Now Dr. Fauci's telling us, Mr. President, you don't need to wear a mask outside if you're vaccinated.
It's like they had this footage of Pete Buttigieg getting in his SUV, being taken a few blocks from work, and then when he gets a few blocks from work, they get the bicycle out of the back and he bike rides the rest of the way. It's, you know, it's all of these symbols. But I have to say, in the midst of all this, there are really great political leaders, people that are doing the right thing. And we're joined by one of those leaders who is giving us all hope, Governor Tate Reeves of the great state of Mississippi. Governor, thanks for being with us on CPAC Now.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
So I think one of the things that we're seeing, and I remember when we were at CPAC Orlando, it was soon after, and right in that month of February going into March, that you were one of the first states to open up, take away the lockdowns, get the schools reopened. You were very bold, Governor, in ensuring that the people of Mississippi could go back to work, go back to school. Why did you take that action?
Well, it's incredibly important that we get our economy moving again. That's one of the things that we've been talking about since the very beginning of this pandemic. Now, in our state, we haven't had a statewide mask mandate since last summer. And in fact, our schools have been open since the first week of August 2020. And so our kids are finishing up the entire year of school here in the next week or so in our state. And we had 87% of all school districts that were open to in-person learning in August of last year, and now we're at 100%. And so, again, we've got to do this because it's incredibly important. And when Dr. Fauci and others say now it's okay to not wear a mask in public when you're outdoors, I just can't help but laugh. We hadn't been doing that in months and months in Mississippi, and our numbers continue to plummet.
Well, Governor, this is going to come as a shock to you. But in Governor Northam's Virginia, if you go outside our neighborhood without your mask on, or you go eat outside at a restaurant without walking in your mask, people really get kind of fired up. So it's a strange blue America, red America dynamic. In Mississippi, are these issues controversial at all?
Well, look, there are people who have differing opinions, but by and large, and I think that Matt, the thing that you just said there was so important, is this distinction between what's happening in blue America and what's happening in red America. And the biggest distinction there is economic activity and economic growth. When you look at those states that are run by Republican governors across America, what you're seeing is people are back in school, people are back in work. We're seeing significant growth in economic activity. We're seeing GDP growth. And then you go to other states and you're talking very, very different outcomes. And it's the reason that we're able to continue to push to get rid of these federal government sanctions on things like unemployment insurance and things such as that. Because if we're going to see a full economic recovery, it's critical that we get all of our people back to work. And that's something that we're working on here in Mississippi. And I know in a lot of other red states across America.
So, Governor, I got to tell you, if Matt Schlapp would have known about this no mask mandate in Mississippi, I think he would have moved the whole Schlapp family down in a matter of a month. I think you made his day. But you brought up a great point about the unemployment benefits. As we know, there are so many Americans out there who are choosing to stay home because they make more money with the benefits that they're receiving, with the COVID relief funds that they've been receiving from the federal government. And you all are deciding to opt out of these additional federal unemployment benefits. Why do you think it's important to make sure that, Americans get back to work? The people of Mississippi realize that they are an important value and resource for your economy.
Well, first of all, let me say a year ago, I supported the federal government's effort to enhance and increase unemployment benefits because unemployment benefits are in place for those on a temporary basis who are out of work through no fault of their own. And what we know is that in March and April and May of last year, there was a lot of unknowns out there. And there are a lot of people that were very concerned. We weren't seeing additional investment in capital, and we were seeing companies across Mississippi and companies across America reduce their workforce. We went from about 22,000 people on unemployment in Mississippi to 350,000 people on unemployment over a couple of week period. The reason that happened is because of the unknown. But we're no longer in May of 2020. We're in May of 2021. What was necessary in May of last year is not necessary in May of this year. When you go around places like Mississippi and across America, and you talk to small business owners and you talk to their employees, it becomes very clear and very evident that their biggest stranglehold, the biggest thing that they have that is keeping them from seeing more and more jobs and more economic growth is the ability to get labor, the ability to get people to come to work. And so that's the reason that I made the decision earlier this week to say that in 30 days, which will be June the 12th, that Mississippi is no longer going to participate in the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program and similar programs like that that the Biden administration continues to push. The only way we're going to see sustained long-term economic growth without significant forms of inflation, and that's one of my biggest concerns right now, is to get people back to work.
Governor, you're the father of a couple of great little athletes who are involved in girls' sports. You've been at the cutting edge of stopping back kind of the ridiculousness of the extreme agenda we're seeing pushed by the left. While they're pushing this extreme agenda, there's a lot of political change. As you said, people are moving from blue states to red states like they can't move fast enough. We also got to wonder where minority voters are. Donald Trump did very well with Hispanics, African Americans, and others. In the state of Mississippi, you just signed some criminal justice reform legislation with all this desire to keep churches and schools open and have economic opportunity. Are you seeing minority voters taking a second, third look at the Republican Party and saying, this is like the common sense party?
Well, we're certainly seeing some of that in our state. We've taken great efforts to harp on the things that we're doing just to make it easier for people, make it easier for individuals to be successful in life. The criminal justice reform is one area in which we've done that. I actually was the lieutenant governor of Mississippi back in 2014 when we passed House Bill 585, which was our initial effort at moving towards a more fair and just system within our criminal justice system. And again, as you mentioned, we were able to get an additional piece of legislation across the finish line this year that I signed into law to make it easier for those individuals who have made a mistake that are in the system. We want to make sure that we focus on reentry and guarantee that those individuals, once they get back into society, that they can take care of themselves and take care of their families through reentry programs. We're working very hard to improve that. And we also want to give those individuals an opportunity once they're in the system to see that they have parole eligibility at some point in the future. And so we've worked hard to reform our parole eligibility laws in such a way that I think conservatives across America and conservatives across Mississippi are very proud of. And ultimately, a wise man once said to me that good policy always makes good politics in the long term. And the fact is, we're enacting good policies in red states across America, and in the long term, that's going to lead to even more and better participation by minorities and other groups from a political standpoint.
We applaud you for your leadership throughout this legislative session, and we applaud you for taking. I don't think I just think they're common sense policies.
I'm telling
you, protecting girls' sports. I mean, where have we come to in this country? There's a lot of fantastic women athletes who probably aren't that aligned with us politically, who are saying this is insanity. So we appreciate what you're doing.
Well, the amazing thing to me with respect to the Fairness Act that we passed to ensure that biological males cannot compete with biological females in sports. The amazing thing to me is in this country, in the great United States of America, for years and years and years, there's been this effort at the federal level to protect female athletes and to ensure that we don't take away opportunities for female athletes when it comes to scholarships at the collegiate level. And all of those various groups have disappeared. They're not even talking about Joe Biden's effort to ensure transgender athletes, that biological males can compete with biological females. It tells me that much of their efforts for the last 30 years were at a minimum just perfunctory, and they weren't really serious about it, because if they were serious about it, they'd be on the front line trying to protect female athletes like my daughters. I've got a 16-year-old that loves to play basketball, a 14-year-old that loves to play soccer. I also have a 9-year-old. Sometimes I say she's BAD bad, but that's just part of it. And she's playing every sport imaginable. But I don't understand why so many of these groups that claim to be in support of female athletes and ensuring opportunities for female athletes have completely disappeared on this issue.
And it's interesting because the NCAA, what they've done is they've targeted these smaller states and threatening them with pulling out their tournaments from these states, which have put some governors in a tough position. But you've taken the right step in ensuring that we protect girls' sports. I think when the NCAA responded to a letter that we sent out here at American Conservative Union, they were like, well, this is about being inclusive. This is about giving everybody an opportunity to compete. And we agree with that, but it can't be at the detriment and the destruction of girls' sports. So, we commend your leadership on that. Let me just turn real quickly back to this concept of inflation and the concept of how you're seeing consumer prices going up. People are going to the grocery store. People are seeing gas prices go up. We've seen the issue with Colonial Pipeline. What are we going to do to keep inflation lower?
Well, it's a major concern. As you may know, my background is in economics and finance, and I was actually in the private sector for many years on the institutional investment side. And the fact is, when the federal government spends trillions and trillions of dollars into the economy, it is going to lead to inflation. And we can have this great educational discussion about inflation, but here's what it really means to my constituents and people across America. When you go to the gas pump and you're paying $1 more per gallon today than you did the day that Joe Biden was elected president, that's called inflation. When you go to the grocery store and you're paying more for bread and milk and other things, that is inflation. The reason we're seeing those increases in prices for bread and milk, which, by the way, really hurts those in the middle class because they're the ones that are having to spend more of their money on these essentials. The fact is, the reason that's happening is because the Biden administration's policies are leading to inflationary actions. For instance, if you do everything you can to make it virtually impossible to produce oil and gas in this country, whereas President Trump had us headed towards energy independence, this administration is going exactly the opposite. They made it hard to produce oil and gas. When you make it hard to produce oil and gas, it costs more money for individuals and for truckers to get that product to the market. That cost is not borne by these big bad corporations. It's borne by the consumers. It's borne by you and me that are going to the grocery store and buying those products. And that's what these policies of the Biden administration mean to people across America, particularly in the middle class. And it's going to have a major impact on our economic growth in our country.
You know, the problem with inflation with consumer prices, plus the increased costs to adding new jobs to the economy by making the American economy uncompetitive with the rest of the world. You talked about energy prices and all these new regulations they put in the economy. I mean, the forgotten men and women out there who were feeling hopeful. Yeah, you know, this is a rough time.
It's very challenging. I mean, there is a reason that in rural parts across America and throughout our country, that working class people have flocked to vote for President Trump in both 2016 and 2020. And quite frankly, they flocked to the polls to vote against Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden because of the awful policies that they understand are going to hit them in the pocketbook. And that's a message that we certainly have to continue to put out to the American people and explain to them when these prices are going up and when you're getting paid the same wage, yet it's costing you more money to buy essential goods and services, bread and milk, etc. That's because of the policies of the Biden administration, and we've got to do something to stop it.
Well,
socialism just doesn't work that well, does it?
Yeah. You know, I think one of the other things that has popped up in a lot of these states is obviously the critical race theory, what's happening in our schools, the indoctrination of our children. How is that being handled in Mississippi?
Well, it's an extremely important issue, and fortunately, we haven't seen any major instances across our state of it, but we're monitoring it very, very closely. And if we need to pass legislation to ensure that it's not taught in our schools, that's fine. Here's the reality: in spite of our challenges, and we have many in the aftermath of of Biden being sworn in, but in spite of our challenges, we still live in the greatest country in the history of mankind. And that's something that I am proud of. I talk to my kids about that all the time. I talk to my constituents about that all the time. And I'll continue to say that. We're gonna do what's right, and we're gonna fight against the policies of the Biden administration, but we're gonna do it within the framework that our Constitution allows for. And that's what makes America great.
Well, keep up the great work in the great state of Mississippi. We appreciate all you're doing. We hope you can join us at CPAC, our big national conference, which is going to be in Dallas, Texas. Sorry about that, Governor. July 9th through the 11th. And we hope to see you there. And we just love working with you.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate y'all's friendship. And I want to be clear. The Schlapp family is invited to visit or move to Mississippi anytime you get ready.
We have very good friends there, so we might take you up on the offer. But I just want to say, I know we hear about Governor DeSantis. I know we hear about Governor Nome, Governor Abbott, Governor Reeves. Tate Reeves, don't forget that name. He is one of the strong conservative leaders that we have fighting for America, fighting against socialism. So we want to thank you so much for your incredible leadership, sir.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us on CPAC Now. We're going to be right back with the former Interior Secretary for Donald Trump, David Bernhardt, after this short break. Welcome back to CPAC Now. We are honored to be joined by a true energy expert, an expert in how the federal government works or doesn't work too often, former Secretary of the Interior, the 53rd Secretary of the Interior, David Bernhardt. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us.
Matt, thanks for having me. It's a thrill to be here.
So the obvious first question is, you guys at Department of Energy, at the EPA, at Interior, gets America on track where we're really responsibly exploiting our resources. We are, I hate using this word, but it was true. We were energy independent. We were a net exporter in some categories.
That's right.
And now, literally 75% of the gas stations in Charlotte, North Carolina have no gas. How do we get here?
It's actually stunning. We have to remember that in 2019, just as you said, we became a net exporter. And that was the first time since 1957.
Wow.
So think about that. And I just got a text from my son, who's 18, who was planning to drive down to the beach in North Carolina. And I'm like, kid, you better take some walking shoes.
Yeah.
And that is ridiculous, frankly. And let's be fair.
Can I tell you something there? So literally, my 14-year-old is the one who's like relaying to me what's happening with gas shortages in our area here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And then later that night, several of my daughters were all sitting around the family room figuring out what we will do if we don't have gas. And we have a place that's outside the city that we escaped to. We were talking about how far we could walk each day to get there. I mean, this is what the American people are talking about.
It's absolutely incredible that we're here. But I think it's a significant indication of just how important it is that we have a robust energy infrastructure, and that we have great diversity in supply and transportation means. And when you see an administration that's walking the other way deliberately, it's very troubling. I mean, it's taken over 100 years to build the system we have, and it's been built with American ingenuity, American creativity, and American exceptionalism. And you don't just turn that switch off without knowing exactly what we're going to do going forward.
So I just read that Colonial Pipeline paid the ransom on this digital hack. Is that right? And number two, what are the big lessons to be learned from the fact that pipelines go down? They have to make sure that they have all the repairs done, that this infrastructure is never going to be on all the time, every day of the year.
Well, a number of news sources have reported that they paid that amount in ransom, and the company certainly hasn't denied that at this time.
Do you have a reaction to that?
Well, my reaction to that is...
If it's true.
If it's true, that's just the beginning. Because
why wouldn't you do it more often if you're a bad guy?
You're exactly right. The federal policy has been to encourage folks to not do that because it absolutely incentivizes future opportunities. I think the other thing that it shows as we move to a more connected world, some folks' watches are connected to their phone, which is connected to their system, that there is serious need to be responsible in terms of computer security and cybersecurity, and to recognize that there are bad actors out there. I think we're likely to find that this was, if not state supported, certainly state condoned, and we need to be responsible about dealing with that. And we also need to say to ourselves...
But why did it happen now? Like, I guess we can't know for sure, but this didn't happen under the Trump administration. The state of Israel, which is always under attack, didn't find itself in quite as precarious position. If this is a state-sponsored act of terrorism, economic terrorism, whatever you call it, isn't just further demonstration that somehow bad people, evil forces feel they can do what they want? I mean, I know we don't really want to answer that question, but isn't that really what's happening?
Well, I think that you are correct that entities, state-sponsored entities, private entities, and states themselves are going to test this new administration. And what they don't see is a position of strength. I mean, let's just be clear about that. That doesn't mean that the administration won't act robustly, but it does mean that they are going to be tested, and they are being tested. And Israel's a very significant situation where there was not immediately a strong reaction by the United States in support of the need for Israel to move forward. And I think that's going to reverberate in an environment in the Mideast where 6 months ago, You would have said things are looking really, really good, and it's turned around in about 110 days.
So you've spent more time in the Department of the Interior than really any Republican, because you served in senior capacity with President Bush and during the tenure of Donald Trump. The people probably don't realize that the Interior Department is where so much of occurs from a public policy and a regulatory standpoint that allows us to responsibly use our lands, including energy production. What are you most proud of?
Well, I think in fairness, when people look back at President Trump's tenure and recognize that Interior managed about 1 in every 5 acres of land in the United States, and there's obviously an energy generation. But I think over time, people will come to recognize that he was a true conservation steward and really leaned forward in improving access to communities and opportunities on public land. And more importantly, he passed legislation that was controversial called the Great American Outdoors Act. But that legislation will provide a lot of funding for a lot of recreational opportunities. And I think over time he will become known for that as much as anything. But the thing that I'm most proud of in working on is the effort that the president went through to improve our regulatory structure, to create opportunity for people to thrive without an incredible burden of government, while at the same time maintaining environmental stewardship and maintaining environmental standards.
Oh.
And I think that was really important.
So then the opposite question, or the converse I have to ask you, what's the most reckless thing in your area that the Biden administration is undertaking?
Well, I think that what we're witnessing is an effort to completely transform the energy economy, and in doing that, they don't have a good alternative. And if you manage things like land in the West, which Interior does, what you recognize is that the hopes and dreams of rural communities depends on the responsible utilization of our natural resources. And if you're going to tell people they can't do that, you need to have, in my opinion, an alternative. Before we make a decision, an environmental decision, we ask, what are the consequences? And in some places, we've added a no net loss policy.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's time for a no net job loss policy, that if you want to move forward transforming the economy, that you do that in a way that you ensure that the current jobs are somewhat protected and exist, because you shut off the pipeline for opportunity or the pipeline for energy, and you really are doing damage to people's hopes and dreams in areas.
We saw this with the Keystone XL Pipeline, the extension of the Keystone Pipeline. Lots of jobs, millions of jobs, really. The response from John Kerry was, hey, don't worry. If you were going to get a job expanding this pipeline, or a job because you would have cheaper, more plentiful energy because of the pipeline, don't worry, we'll get you a job making solar panels or whatever. Of course, those solar panels are never made here, but
yeah.
But what was it? Were you offended by the fact that he thinks we're so stupid that we think that these guys will get like a better green job, whatever that means?
Well, I don't think offended is the right word. I think it's more that it's simply a dishonest statement. If you had an alternative that you wanted to put on the table and say, here's the actual job, I'd love to hear it. But they don't have that. They have a theoretical possibility of a job. And that's very different to a family that's making ends meet than a real job. A real job has a paycheck at the end of it. A theoretical job may never show up. And we can't depend, our people can't depend on the theoretical job that might never show up. And that's really the choice that they're asking you to follow. And I think that's unreasonable. I think it's unreasonable to the American people. And I don't think it's rational.
So John Kerry going all around the globe talking about the way they're going to re-enter the Paris Climate Accord. Maybe they've already re-entered it. When are we going to get to the point when we realize as a country we don't have to enter into a global agreement to make changes? Why don't they just, if Biden wants to make the changes, just make them? Why do they have to fly to Paris to make them? I never really understand that.
Well, I think
you want to pay more in taxes, just write more checks. Right? If you want to throttle the American economy, you're the president. Just start doing it.
Well, I think the more important issue is, let's say we burden the American people with those ideas and those policies. What difference will they make? If the world's going to move forward without them, what difference will that ultimately make, except making us feel better that we imposed a burden on our people? And I think that's irresponsible. I think there's so many opportunities to ensure we invest in things that ensure adaptation or allow us to be better positioned to manage through climate change. Those are all great things. But if you're going to burden the public and it's not going to make a difference, you've got to ask yourself, is that the best investment when maybe we can spend that money on schools or other things that are equally important?
What's your message to the American people, half of whom, 74, 75 million, are pretty discouraged right now? They're looking at this radical agenda, which you and I have never seen before. We've never seen anything like this. This is our kind of our worst nightmare of policy proposals emanating from the Biden administration, being pushed through by Nancy Pelosi in the House. It seems like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are our only kind of wall of defense against all of these radical policies. What's your message to the 75 million? You still get up in the morning and feel hope that the country isn't going to embrace this kind of Marxist economic and social experiments? Actually, they're not experiments, they're failures, but are we going to embrace them?
So my view on that is I tell my kids every day, the minute you wake up, you've already won the lottery. You're in the greatest country in the world, and don't forget that for a minute. Also recognize that at the end of the day, liberty will prevail. We are a country that's based on freedom, and I think the need to push back against the idea that dissenting views shouldn't be heard, that we need to fight that fight. The policy fights at the end of the day will come and go through the wisdom of the American people realizing, hey, this doesn't make sense. And at the end of the day, that is what elections are about. And so we have to participate in democracy. We have to listen when candidates talk, and we need to respond when the policies aren't ones that reflect the vision and the wisdom of the American people. But at the end of the day, the American people are wise, and they will make the decisions, and we'll live with those decisions because we all won the lottery. We get to live here.
I said, God bless America. Now, I want to ask you a question. Do you want to join with me in raising Dr. Fauci's blood pressure just a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
I want to thank you
my God,
for coming on the
created
set.
a big problem, Matt.
We are
By
now
the way, we're both vaccinated.
We're now a super spreader. We're going to be right back with the lovely Mercedes Schlapp on CPAC Now after the short break. Welcome back to CPAC Now. We lost David Bernhardt, the former Secretary of the Interior, but we've gained Mercy.
How did it go with Bernhardt?
He's so smart.
I know.
He knows so much about what's going on in these energy markets, and quite honestly, he's worried because, it's not like a little dial that you have like on a TV set or something. The energy markets are incredibly complicated, and once you start to have these irregularities and add all these regulations, unfortunately, our energy prices are going to be spiking for some time to come.
Well, we want to try to, in the bad news, we try to find the good news. And that's what we're doing every day at CPAC. So please always feel free to send us a note or a direct message
some
to us.
Cash, whatever you want, okay?
You can join the membership circles. Don't forget, you go to conservative.org, be part of the CPAC family. I'm telling you, we're fighting every single day.
We are.
To ensure that we save this great country and make sure we stop the socialist. But on a positive note, we received a sweet letter from Anna Fowler. She is from South Carolina. She actually came to CPAC in Orlando. Took a photo with you, sweetheart.
I love it. That is
Isn't that
awesome.
great? So what you
Look at
learn
Anna.
about CPAC is that it is such a high number of young people that go to these events. It is a family affair, but we get so many college kids, so many high school kids who really feel that they have either been shut out, they've had to be silenced, or they've been bullied in their schools. And so they come to CPAC to basically build their armor, to be ready to go.
Think about this, sweetheart. So many of these kids have been bullied in school, and now they're seeing their parents get bullied in these big companies.
That's right.
They have to sign on the dotted line for the most radical of policies. Bad time in our history.
But it will take a conservative army to win this battle. And I got to tell you, I'm always so inspired by our youth who go to CPAC. And we've got CPAC Texas coming July 9th. Through the 11th, you can save your spot, pre-register, go to conservative.org. We should have the registration site ready to go and launching May 20th. So we definitely want y'all to join us, and join all the great speakers who are coming to CPAC.
We're already getting phone calls. I'm telling you, I was in the office all day yesterday, and people are already calling in and reserving their spots because this CPAC will have no constraints on it. We can fill that hotel up, and I think the American people, at least part of the 75 million, want to come together.
That's right. But we want to thank you for joining us. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media channels. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at CPAC. You can follow me at Mercedes Schlapp, follow Matt at M Schlapp, and also follow our great guests who've been on the show, and they are definitely fighting for such a great cause. And also send us your pictures like Anna, because we want to make sure that we're able to share your great stories and how we're connected. We're all connected in making sure that we succeed as a nation and as an organization, of course. But we thank you so much for joining us tonight. Good night, and God bless you all.